So why don't you begin by your name, what you do here at Lovett, and the culture you come from.
Mhm. My name is Irma Navarro Brown. I am an Associate Director of College Counseling at the Lovett School. And I was born and raised in Guadalajara, Mexico, but grew up in the south side of Chicago before moving to North Carolina to attend college.
So, Ms. Navarro, when you first came to America, after growing up in Mexico, what was the adjustment like? What was your life in Mexico, and then what did your life become when you moved to Chicago?
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up in a really safe middle class neighborhood in Guadalajara, but when we moved to the United States, that first transition was a little tough. Like I mentioned, I grew up in the South Side. My neighborhood particularly was dominated by the Latin Kings gang. There was a lot of drug dealings, there was a lot of violence, and so attending a public school was very different because in Mexico there is a lot of respect for the teaching profession, and you are expected to be polite and appreciate the people who are standing in front of the classroom teaching you. And it was very rare that you had students who didn't succeed. It was really a handful of students who really genuinely struggled, but the vast majority of students wanted to be there. And in the United States, particularly at public schools, that didn't feel like that was the case. So being a strong student was not easy. And being a foreigner, not speaking the language, was even harder to adjust. So that, I think, in addition to the cultural change, was probably the hardest to adapt to when I was 10.
So how long have you been here at Lovett?
This is my third year at the Lovett School.
So what do you think the culture of Lovett is, and how is that different from the culture you had back home? Do you see any, and it doesn't just have to be, like a language or, a language barrier. It can be, an academic thing. It can be a social thing, something like that.
I've always felt like I've had to straddle two different worlds, so coming to Lovett is no different. But my Mexican reality, so I'm talking my immediate family, friends, predominantly members of the working class. Most of them have little to no formal education, not even a high school degree. In fact, my father is illiterate. Speaks Spanish at home. That's the dominant language. So those are the biggest differences. I remember, I had a conversation with my husband, who is white, and he said, we were talking about me finishing my graduate degree and how 12% of Americans have a graduate degree. And he's like, that seems like it's very small because most people I know have a graduate degree. And it was interesting because that's the case now at Lovett. Parents, faculty, but growing up, maybe I knew 3 people with college degrees. So it's just very different worlds.
So, do you ever get the feeling like you have this type of pressure coming from your immediate family to, be Mexican?
Mm-hmm.
And then, do you ever feel like you have some kind of different pressure coming from school telling you to be a different way or to act a certain way?
No, I don't feel pressure per se from either my family or the Lovett community. I do feel that at Lovett I don't have a lot of outlets, and it's not specific to Lovett, it's just the environment that I had in undergrad or when I was working at a different institution. But there aren't a lot of outlets for me to express that part of myself. Everybody just assumes that my background has been a particular way, and that I can associate with a lot of the concerns or a lot of the pressures that students are feeling, and I empathize with that, otherwise I wouldn't be here. But that's not the reality that I had when I was in their shoes. And so that's, I think, a little bit of the challenge. And the bigger piece, I would say, is that I don't always feel safe addressing teachable moments, as I call them. So I've had many times, and I think my first year was the toughest being here, where I would hear a student say something incredibly insensitive. But as a college counselor, I'm already having to be the bearer of bad news with, well, perhaps this school is a reach and not a target. And so gaining somebody's trust and convincing them that I'm there to help them and to support them you tend to sort of avoid any of the situations that might make somebody feel uncomfortable. And so most times when students make very insensitive, borderline racial comments, not out of malice, just out of ignorance, I don't always feel comfortable addressing it because I don't want to make people feel bad. And then I feel bad because I feel like they need to know, because if they go on to college and they say the same thing to somebody else, they're going to think very poorly of that person. But I always hold back, and I don't know if it's my fault or if it's just love it and I should blame love it. I think it's a little bit of both.
Has there been any particular moment in the 3 years that you've been here where you felt very uncomfortable? Is there maybe a story that you can tell us about a time when, when you were here at school and, you just felt very out of place or insulted by someone's actions or by someone's words in regards to your cultural heritage?
Yes. But out of the privacy of those people, obviously, I'm going to plead the fifth. But I will say, I think one of the things that is challenging is sort of the accumulation of just that negative commentary. I remember one student was talking about, her father's company and, the Mexicans that, that work with her dad and them driving a rape van. And I'm thinking oh, I have relatives that drive, those types of vans to get to work and do what they need to do, and they're lovely people. Or comments from parents, when I'm suggesting perhaps a second tier school, just to have balance in their list, and the comment from the parents is, I would never allow my son or daughter to apply to a school where they're going to get a technical degree, as if this other potential opportunity is just so beneath them. I was like, well, where would that put me or my dad, like I said, who can't even read or write? So it's those little things, aside from the ones where they're more public. I think for me it's those small ones. I don't know why I'm getting emotional.
Do you think the cultural perception of Mexicans at Lovett is accurate? Do you think a majority of kids know the true ins and outs of being, someone from Mexico, mm-hmm. not just, the common stereotypes?
Mm-hmm. To be perfectly honest, I don't know the answer to that because the conversation never comes up. So I don't really know what the perception of Mexicans is. I'd be curious to know what that's like, and so I choose to believe that it's not a negative one, but I don't know.
What is a good way so you're at a school that's predominantly Caucasian, you come from a home that's predominantly Hispanic, and then your husband is also part of that Caucasian culture. How do you balance all this? Do you have a specific way? Do you have a rhythm or a quote unquote set schedule where you're speaking Spanish with your relatives or something like that?
It's subtle, but I have to have my little outbursts. And if you look around my office, you find those little spots. Like there's the poster behind me is a Frida Kahlo poster, or there's a book on my table of Mexican art. All of the books on my shelf are books from my undergraduate degree or the master's program in Spanish that I'm doing. Most of the stations on my Pandora are Spanish-speaking stations. And I do try to call my mom and my siblings and my best friend at least once a week just so that I can, think in Spanish and have conversations that are culturally relevant where I don't have to explain that. So that's how I keep sane. I think that's how I feel connected. And recently, my husband started taking me to this little Mexican restaurant on Buford Highway. So we go every Sunday to have tacos after we go to church. So it's subtle. At this point, I would say 90% of my life is sort of lived and experienced in a more traditional American setting. I'm like that true success immigrant story. I'm a member of the middle class. I have a lovely job. I've got grad school, but that part of what my reality as a Mexican immigrant is. It's very limited now to that interaction that I have with my family. But they all live far away. They're either in Mexico or Chicago or Texas. So it's a little bit tougher.
Do you ever get the feeling that your connection with your Mexican heritage is being lost?
Yes. And I worry about that. I think that's part of the reason that I went back to grad school to pursue a degree, because it was a way to continue to learn about my culture and continue to speak in Spanish and be around people where learning about the Hispanic culture is a positive. And other venues too, like I don't know if it's on purpose or even conscious, but I think I know most of the people who speak Spanish on campus. So there's Humberto at IT, and there's Miss Mitchell and Miss Stats in the language department, and Maria and Alejandro and Ramon in dining services. So I try to seek out those outlets whenever possible.
So you mentioned a couple of teachers, and this will be a slightly different question. You're not a Spanish teacher, but you've, I think, subbed for a couple of classes before. From a curriculum-based perspective, is there anything missing within the Spanish courses? Is there something that you notice with the students who take Spanish that you would want fixed, or that you see as a potential problem for them learning Spanish, and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I taught Spanish 5. I taught with Miss Stats last year, so I was in a level 5 Spanish course. I don't think that gap is necessarily stemming from what the faculty are doing, as much as you can only provide the opportunities to students, and they can choose to take it as far as the students want. And I don't know how you do this, but the curiosity from the student body, particularly the Spanish, the students in the Spanish courses, I don't know how in the on-level courses, how the faculty could perhaps do a better job at inspiring the students to be more curious about what goes behind.
Do you find there to be a lack of, and if it's the students, go ahead and just say it.
I do think that there's a lack of curiosity coming from the student body. At least that's how I experienced it with not all of them, but generally in the course that I taught. Great students, and I had a lot of fun teaching, but there didn't seem to be the tell me more, kind of opportunities or moments when we were teaching the course.
Now, one of the other interviews was done with a Hispanic student, who is from Argentina and Chile, and when I asked him about the curriculum, he said that a lot of the curriculum seems to be more Spain-based in terms of cultural learning than it is South American-based. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think it needs to be that way?
I don't think so. I mean, there's only so much you can do with the intro level courses. It's sort of more base, and you can't really go too much into the cultural pieces. But I know, for example, and I can only speak on what I know, but the Spanish 5 course rotates. 1 year Spain. Last year it was Mexico, and that's the course that I taught. This year was just sort of South America. So there was a year-long focus on things that were not Spanish, but things that were more Latino or country-specific. And I hope that stays that way, that grows.
Excellent. I think that's it, unless you have anything else to add or any final thoughts.
I guess the only thing I would say is the nurturing piece. I think the nurturing environment, it's its best asset and worst enemy. Because we don't realize, I think, and I include myself in that, but students, faculty, on a daily basis on our small activities, I think we lose sight of the fact that this place is very unnatural. This is a very unique place, but it's not representative of the reality that most Americans are living, or the reality that most college students are going to be coming from. And so my biggest worry or my biggest wish for students who are graduating is that they will choose to put themselves in situations that are slightly uncomfortable, or that are going to challenge them in some ways, because I think Lovett students are open-minded and excited to learn about different cultures. We just don't have the space to do that. College will provide that space, but only if you choose to seek it out yourself. Otherwise, college can be the same experience, safe, positive, nurturing environment, but you don't grow when things come easy to you. You don't grow when you don't mess up. And I hope that that would change. I don't know how I can change it here, but definitely going forward, I see a lot of potential.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.